Good evening. Welcome to the 8th annual Darwin Keynote Lecture. It's the centerpiece of our annual Darwin Week celebrations. I'm Richard Thomas from the Department of Zoology, and I helped organize some of this stuff. As some of you already know, yesterday was Charles Darwin's 204th birthday. And this time of year, organizations all over the world get together to celebrate his scientific legacy, which, as most of us know who are biologists, continues to get stronger and permeates all of biology. Before I go any further, I really do need to thank a bunch of very generous people that are making all of this possible. And I'm going to read it to make sure I get it all. The Graduate Professional Student Council and the undergraduate student government both made very generous and crucial contributions. The Department of Zoology, Sigma Xi, the College of Science, the Departments of Plant Biology, Microbiology, and Geology, and the Office of the Provost have all contributed generously to this. And I especially want to acknowledge contributions that were given in memory of the late Bill Mertens, who was an alumnus of the Department of Zoology. And obviously, these kind of events don't happen on their own, and there's quite a large group of faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates that are making all of the events this week happen. Here in the U.S., we face kind of widespread opposition to the teaching of evolutionary biology in public school classrooms, sort of mostly based on the perception that it conflicts somehow with religious convictions, and state and local government bodies are seemingly always proposing and even occasionally passing legislation that allows creationism in all its many guises to be taught in our classrooms. And as I found out recently, there's legislation pending over in Missouri in the House there right now that's mandates the teaching of intelligent design in public school classrooms and basically redefines the whole nature of science, which is kind of interesting. Our speaker tonight is the director of the National Center for Science Education, that's done more than any other to sort of expose and oppose these kinds of efforts. It's an ongoing thing, and I should say I've been a member of NCSE for many years, and I hope you will all give them some of your money after hearing hearing the talk tonight. They do good stuff. Dr. Eugenie Scott, our speaker tonight, received her PhD in physical anthropology from over at the University of Missouri. She's worked as a professor, faculty member at the University of Kentucky and some other places. She has enough honorary degrees to paper a pretty good-sized wall. And she's been the executive director of NCSE since, I think, is it 1987 or so. And she's going to speak tonight on what would Darwin say to today's creationist, which you can already see. We're going to have some time after the talk. Dr. Scott will answer some questions. When we're done, you're all invited to head back out that way to the Corker Lounge. We'll have a reception, further conversation, everybody's invited. And Dr. Scott will also be signing copies of a couple of her recent books. Some of you may have heard that funds are a little bit tight in Illinois in general, and at SIU in particular. And I can certainly tell you that it's getting harder every year to pull these kind of events off. So we're also going to have some Darwin-related retail opportunities out in the Corker Lounge, and a big bucket for donations. This is the first year I've ever groveled like this, but I can guarantee you that if you can contribute, I guarantee that all your money will go to funding events like this. I'll stop groveling and let's welcome Dr. Eugenie Scott.
Thank you very much, Richard. I've had a wonderful visit here. It's all too short, but I very much enjoyed meeting the students and faculty in the science departments, and I had a lot of fun in a talk earlier this afternoon, which was very well attended and listened to very intently by the audience. So what's not to like? I'm having a very good time here. Thank you for inviting me. It's really fun to give Darwin Day talks because it gives me a chance to think a little bit about Charles Darwin, who certainly was one of the leading scientists of all time, and reflect a little bit on what he means to science today. And also, the whole idea of evolution has had a very profound effect outside of science as well, in literature, in politics, goodness knows, education, and just how we look at the world in general, philosophically, shall we say. So I want to talk about what would Darwin say to today's creationists were we able to bring him back, which we can't, but we do the best we can. Well, let's talk a little bit about creationists, because it's useful for you to know what I have in mind when I use the word creationist, because this term is defined rather differently by different people. Scientists overwhelmingly accept that living things have common ancestors. That's what evolution is. But there's a notable gap between what the general public holds, what the general public accepts, and what scientists hold based on their research. Anti-evolutionism in the United States has been depressingly consistent. If we look at these data from the Gallup organization, the top line shows, there we go, shows humans are created specially in their present form, and the percentages have been very consistently over time in the mid to high 40%. The middle line shows humans evolved, but this evolution was guided by God. This has been very consistent as well, the high to mid 30%. And the bottom line shows the percentage of Americans who believe that humans evolved, but God was not involved. And this has been rather reliably around 12 to 14%. So the percentages of Americans who accept evolution is not very high. This contrasts strikingly with science. Scientists accept evolution in the high 90 percentiles, according to a Pew Foundation survey of AAAS members conducted in 2009. Pollsters asked a different question rather than the Gallup questions. The Pew researchers asked, humans and other living things have evolved over time, true or false? And a question which was worded the same way was also asked by the general public around the same time. And the percentages of difference are really quite striking, 97% versus 61% accepting that statement. And it's equally striking in terms of the second question there. Humans existed in their present form since the beginning of time. 2% of scientists agreed to this, whereas 31% of the public agrees. So there's a real disconnect between what scientists feel about evolution and what the general public feels. Now, this anti-evolutionism is fed, at least in part, by the many creationist organizations that flourish here in the United States. This is only a smattering, and this doesn't include the handful of intelligent design organizations. Anti-evolutionists, for the most part, are special creationists, which is a particular view of not that God created, because all Christians believe God created, but special creation is a perspective on how God created. And in special creationism, God creates everything in its present form. And in the most common versions of this view, there is, among these created forms, a limited amount of variation, shall we say. The kinds of organisms as described in the Bible have limited genetic variation with them, so you can get variation within the kind, you can get evolution within the kind, but the kinds themselves are separate and do not share any common ancestry. And usually in special creationism, this creation event occurred at one time. Now there's other forms of special creation, something called progressive creationism, in which God creates sequentially over time. So first he creates single-celled organisms, and then simple metazoa, and a little later in time, more complicated metazoa, and then he causes the Cambrian explosion to take place, and then he brings about vertebrates, and so you get lions and tigers and bears by the time you get to more recent time periods. But this is still a special creationist point of view, because in all of these creation events, God is creating things pretty much in their present form. And that is really the defining characteristic of special creationism, more than whether the earth is old or the earth is young, whether creation took place in 6 24-hour days or whatever. But the big idea is that God created things in pretty much their present form. And that, and this view, of course, is completely incompatible with acceptance of evolution. It's not a lecture on religion, but do realize that this is only one of many this is only one of many Christian views, and that Catholics and mainstream Protestants believe in something called theistic evolution, which accepts evolution, but as scientists have described it, but believing that this is part of God's plan, and of course there's many different kinds of theistic evolution. There's basically two kinds of special creationism. There's young earth creationism, which is the idea that a very strict biblical literalist view that the universe is only a few thousand years old. And then there's old earth creationism, which is a view that accepts modern physics, chemistry, and geology, radioisotopic dating, the idea of an ancient universe, an ancient planet. That's okay. This is a point of view that you often find associated with progressive creationism. Intelligent design basically overlaps these two. Some intelligent design proponents are young earthers, some of them are old earthers. Intelligent design claims to be agnostic on the age of the earth, although that would seem to me to be a pretty important basic thing, you know. Either the world is 10,000 years old, 6,000 years old, or it's billions of years old. It's not just a matter of whatever you like. I mean, that's kind of basic science going on there, but nonetheless. The big thing about intelligent design type of creationism is that they really focus on the idea of complexity in nature and the assumption that great complexity in nature could not be produced through natural causes. So they kind of leave out age of the earth stuff, and some of them are old earthers, some of them are young earthers, but they are all special creationists. In the intelligent design case, what you have is a situation where when you find structures or processes of what they call irreducible complexity, that is evidence for special creation. They don't put it that bluntly. I put it that bluntly. But those of us who have studied their work believe that that is really what they're talking about. They don't like to be called creationists, so sorry. There. Evolution views living things as having common ancestors. And like a family tree, living things form a tree of descent. Creationists view living things as being related more like a lawn, separate blades of grass, separate special creations, unconnected by any kind of genealogical relationship. More sophisticated, more modern creationists view living things more of an orchard rather than a lawn, shall we say. In the creationist literature, you will find references to the lawn of creationism and the tree of evolution. More recently, you're seeing references to the orchard of creationism, where you get the special creation of a particular kind, like pheasants or ducks or here dogs, cats, horses. And then within that kind you have evolution. So God may have created the horse kind, but then over time the horse kind diversified into horses, donkeys, zebras, other equids. Same thing with cats, lions, tigers, lions, tigers, bobcats, house cats, and so forth. You have variation within the kind. But horses or I should more closely related, cats and dogs don't have a common carnivore ancestor. They are separate trees in the orchard, shall we say. Now, this book by the Intelligent Design Promoting Discovery Institute called Explore Evolution shows the same creationist orchard as do the young earth creationists. Which is another reason why most of us consider intelligent design to be just a subset of the wider creationist movement. Now, creationists have been around since the early 1960s. They have been making claims about Darwin and claims about evolution, and the vast majority of them are simply wrong. So, to begin to answer the question that we started out with this evening, what would Darwin say to today's creationists? I suspect the first thing that he would say is, "What deathbed confession?" In this very charming book by Jim Moore, The Darwin Legend, he tells the story about how this urban legend of Darwin's deathbed confession got started and perpetuated. It's kind of a fun story, actually. In 1815, Lady Hope claimed to have visited Darwin on his deathbed back in 1881, 30 years before. She claimed that he confessed to her that he had recanted his previous views, accepted Jesus as his Savior, and regretted ever developing the theory of evolution, which has done so much ill to the world. Elizabeth Reed Cotton was born in 1842 in Tasmania, and she married Sir James Hope when he was 69 and she was 35. She was an evangelist, she was a pamphleteer, a temperance crusader, and made it something of a name for herself as an evangelist in Victorian England. She claims to have visited Darwin at Down House. It's a good question. Did she ever talk to Darwin? James Moore thinks quite probably she did. In the early 1880s, there was an evangelist in the town of Down named James Fegan. He, again, just like Lady Hope, promoted temperance, he promoted education, and he actually did something that was really quite charming. He would take poor urban boys from the city of London and bring them out to the countryside. And of course, Down was way out in the country. Still is pretty much in the country, but it was way out in the country back then. Fegan visited Down House, Darwin's residence, with a group of boys, and he had the boys sing some hymns, and Darwin was said to have been quite charmed by them and gave them all sixpence, which I'm sure charmed them quite a bit too. That fall, Darwin let Fegan use the old schoolroom at Down for these boys. Now, Moore thinks that when Fegan became ill in the summer of 1881, Lady Hope came in to replace him as sort of the local evangelist in that part of England. And being a lady, as she was, she would certainly be of the proper social class to make a call upon Darwin, and it is completely possible that she did visit Darwin's house. And in fact, in her recounting of her visit to Darwin on his deathbed, do hear his confession, she mentions pieces of furniture and paintings and so forth. So she either had talked to someone who had been to Down House, or she herself had been to Down House. The first major telling of the Darwin legend was in August of 1915, when Lady Hope was in the United States taking part in a Baptist evangelical revival with a number of other guest speakers. A.T. Robertson of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville was the main speaker, and when it came her time to speak, she told him that Darwin had confessed his love of Scripture on his deathbed, and she had heard it, and that he had said in his youth and regretted things that he had said in his youth that he no longer agreed with. A version of this was published in the Watchman Examiner, a Baptist publication, and Lady Hope quoted Darwin as saying, "I was a young man with unformed ideas. I threw out queries, suggestions, wondering all the time over everything. And to my astonishment, the ideas took on like wildfire." The story spread widely. It was greatly embellished. Stories tend to get embellished. And different versions had Charles Darwin renouncing evolution, speaking of his love of Christ. Darwin's family indignantly denied this and denied ever having met Lady Hope. By 1915, however, Emma was dead, and Emma was Darwin's wife, of course, and the children would not have remembered the specific guests back in the 1880s, who probably visited only once anyway. Also, Lady Hope's memories by that time were probably a bit embellished as well. The visit had supposedly taken place in the 1880s, and she was reporting on it close to 25 years later. And, you know, we all do this. People will often believe what they wish to believe. Suffice to say, though, that Darwin did not renounce evolution, and it was unlikely that he became a Christian on his deathbed either. His personal views on Jesus or Christianity were made fairly clear in his autobiography. He felt that Christianity, with its doctrine of damnation for anyone who is not Christian, which would have included his free-thinking father and his grandfather and his brother and quite a few other people that he socialized with. This was, as he put it in his autobiography, a damnable doctrine. There's speculation, debated by Darwin scholars, about whether the death of his daughter Annie at the age of 10 was a turning point for Darwin's religious beliefs. Certainly, he had doubts before Annie's death about the theodicy issue in Christianity, the issue of evil. Theodicy is the problem of evil. How would a all-wise, all-knowing, and all-good God let the kind of suffering take place that takes place in the world? Why are there famines, wars, disease? Why do animals suffer as well? God can get off the hook with people because Adam and Eve suffered, or Adam and Eve sinned, and therefore all the rest of us are forced to suffer. But why do all animals have to suffer pain and disease and suffer along with human beings? I mean, evolution did not invent the problem of theodicy. This is something that Christian scholars and theologians have wrestled with for 2,000 years. And Darwin certainly thought upon this issue. The thought is, James Moore, in fact, being the main proponent of this view, is that when his beloved daughter Annie died of a very painful disease, it's still not completely sure what the disease was, but she died a painful, lingering disease in which she suffered greatly, and her grieving parents just were completely distraught. It almost destroyed them. If you saw the movie Creation that came out a couple of years ago, there's a pretty good treatment, obviously a movie version. Emma wasn't that pretty. But there was a pretty good treatment of the anguish that the Darwin family felt at Annie's death. And James Moore thinks, some other scholars agree, I don't have a horse in that race, that it was Annie's death that really made Darwin turn completely away from formal religion. That doesn't mean that he became an atheist, on the other hand. Darwin might well have been influenced by his friend Thomas Henry Huxley, who invented the term agnosticism. Huxley believed that in this world one can never know. That's a quote. Which was pretty much the belief held by Darwin, who wrote to his friend and fellow scientist, the minister Asa Gray. He wrote that when contemplating the nature of God, quote, "I feel most deeply that the whole subject is too profound for the human intellect. A dog might as well speculate on the mind of Newton. Let each man hope and believe what he can. Certainly I agree with you that my views are not at all necessarily atheistical." Didn't come right out and say it, but clearly this is a man who had doubts about Christianity. In any regard, there's no evidence that Darwin was ever visited on his deathbed by Lady Hope, nor that he converted to Orthodox Christianity. And interestingly enough, I'm pleased to inform you that even the creationist website Answers in Genesis has a whole list of arguments creationists should not use because they are not true. And Darwin's deathbed confession is one of them. So that's good to know. Well, Darwin would probably not be surprised to hear that modern creationists attack the validity of evolution. There certainly was opposition to evolution during his time, and certainly there has been opposition to evolution subsequently. This is J. William Dawson, who is a great scientist from McGill University, and he was an anti-evolutionist. And I'm going to show you some of these wonderful quotes about the death of evolution. I'm indebted to Glenn Morton's website for most of these quotes. In 1894, Dawson wrote, I guess I'm going to have to turn here. "It is true that a tide of criticism hostile to the integrity of Genesis has been rising for some years, but it seems to beat vainly against a solid rock, and the ebb is now evidently set in. The battle of historical and linguistic criticism may indeed rage for a time over the history and date of the Mosaic Law, but insofar as Genesis is concerned, it has been practically decided by scientific exploration." Well, that's good. That was taken care of in 1894. And then in 1903, another sage wrote, "It seems plain the reaction the reaction has commenced, and that the pendulum that has swung so strongly in the direction of evolution is now oscillating the other way." 1935, this is my favorite. "The chain of evidence that purports to support the theory of evolution is a chain indeed, but its links are formed of sand and mist." God, we don't write that way anymore. Maybe for good reason. Analyze the evidence and it melts away. Turn the light of true investigation upon its demonstrations, and they fade like fog before the freshening breeze. Love it. 1935. 1988, Luther Sutherland. Leading scientists are abandoning their faith in Darwin's theory of evolution. 1998. That Darwinian creation story has held sway for more than 100 years. It's now on the way out. 2005, pardon me. There's no question that Darwin's theory is creaking and tottering and will implode soon. 2000, the jury is still out. And, full circle, 2007, raise your hand if you don't believe in evolution. Some of you remember this. All right. So Darwin would not be terrible. Y'all know what this is, don't you? The debate, okay. If you don't know, ask somebody sitting next to you who's nodding, doing this. Darwin would have been very surprised at the reemergence of the idea that the Earth is only a few thousand years old. While a student at Edinburgh, he had studied geology extensively, and actually his first scientific papers were on geology. Darwin published more in geology than in biology, especially in the early part of his career. He began his scientific career as a geologist, and in fact, his views on the formation of coral atolls are still considered valid by scientists today. And in fact, if you go over to the soil science department, if you have a soil science department, they're still reading Darwin because his conclusions about soil science are also quite valid. So he knew quite well that geologists since the 1700s had been making discoveries that made it very unlikely the possibility of Earth being only a few thousand years old. In the 17th and 18th century, geologists were establishing knowledge of the Earth in a systematic way that had not been done before. They were building on Steno's basic principles developed in the 16th century, such as the principle of superposition, that the stuff on the top is more recent than the stuff on the bottom. Seems very basic, but somebody had to point that out to us. Principle of lateral continuity, that if you're looking at a rock layer and it goes on as far as you can see, that was laid down at one time. Very basic principles that had been established in the 1600s, and then geologists of the 17 and 1800s built upon them. And so by the time of Darwin actually he started his geological work in the 1830s, by the time Darwin came along, the idea that the Earth was ancient was very, very well established. But there remained a very small group of geologists who called themselves scriptural geologists. The first few decades of the 1800s. By Darwin's time, certainly by the middle of the 1800s, they were an anachronism. No one in geology accepted the idea of a young Earth. Young Earthism is a relatively new development in American creationism that began actually in the early part of the 20th century. Charles Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, was published just in time for Darwin to take it with him on his voyage around the Earth and the voyage of the Beagle. And it greatly excited him. And while Darwin was on the voyage of the Beagle, the second edition, or the second volume of Lyell's Principles of Geology was published, and Darwin was just dying to have it sent to him. So it was mailed halfway around the planet to him so that he could read it on his voyage of the Beagle. Lyell proposed the principle of uniformitarianism, that processes that we see operating today, like erosion or mountain building, flooding and so forth, were also operating in the past. The processes were uniform. Now, Lyell wasn't saying that the rates of change were uniform or that all changes were slow and gradual. And in fact, Lyell and Darwin both recognized that some geological processes were catastrophic. Sometimes nature moved in ways that were very dramatic and very sudden and made very big changes all at once. In fact, Darwin was in South America during an earthquake and came out one day and saw rock strata this way. After the earthquake, they were like that, and that's a catastrophic change, right? So not everything had to be slow and gradual, but the processes are the same. That was the big contribution of Lyellian uniformitarianism. There was no need to invent new processes or mechanisms to explain the history of the planet. We could extrapolate backwards. the processes of the present. And of course, this also contributed to the idea that the Earth was very ancient. So the idea that the Earth was young would have seemed very strange to Darwin. Yet this is a key aspect of modern young Earth creationism. As is almost everything in geology, the result of catastrophic processes rather than gradual ones. Which of course makes a lot of sense, because if creationists can show that the Earth is young, evolution loses right away, because there is no way for the processes of evolution to produce the kind of huge variation of organisms that we see today, unless there's a lot of time for it to take place. So the young Earth creationists are quite adamant about the Earth being young. The foundation of young Earth creationism is biblical literalism. Therefore, they believe Noah's flood has to be an historical event. And there's a whole field of flood geology, is what they call it, developed in creation science, with views that are decidedly outside of the mainstream. In this slide, you see the sort of normal geology plus biblical geology, and the idea that the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic were periods of time when the entire Earth was covered with water, and the whole Paleozoic and Mesozoic took only 1 year, would have been considered fantasy by Darwin, as well as by modern geologists. As another example, consider creationist views of the formation of sedimentary layers all over the planet, from the Himalayas to the rock cuts that you see when you drive along a highway in Kentucky or southern Illinois, to a place like the Colorado Plateau and the Grand Canyon. Now, all sedimentary layers have to be laid down by the flood. So the entire, in some places, 6,000 feet of strata that you find in Grand Canyon and the whole rest of the Colorado Plateau had to be laid down at different times during Noah's flood. And it perhaps does not need repeating on a university campus. This is nothing that you can support through science. But support it they do, or support it they attempt to do, but from the standpoint of science, not very successfully. If you want to know more about why Grand Canyon is not catastrophically deposited, and by the way, Grand Canyon was cut in a period of a week by a huge amount of water rushing through and catastrophically cutting it. You begin to wonder why 6,000 feet of sediment that's all kind of wet and squishy because it's been underwater for so long, when you run a huge amount of water through that, why those don't just all completely collapse, but I digress. NCSC has a raft trip down Grand Canyon every summer, and it's really a lot of fun. But we give you the creation and evolution interpretation of Grand Canyon. I give you the creationist position, we have a geologist to give you the evolution position, and you can make up your own minds. We really have a very good time, though. But here we are looking at a sandstone slab that young Earth creationists claim shows evidence of reptiles. You do see little footprints in there, they're really cute, about this big. These are footprints left by reptiles, or tetrapods at any rate, escaping the rising water of the flood. Now, one difficult question that flood geology has a problem with in Grand Canyon and many other parts of the world is if you look at the strata of Grand Canyon, you see limestone, which is laid down by water, and you see sandstone, which is laid down by water, and you see siltstones and maybe more limestones and all these water lane levels, and then you get the Coconina sandstone, which is aeolian. It's laid down by wind. It's this beautiful big white band at the top of Grand Canyon that you can see if you're looking up at it. And then on top of that is more sandstone. There's more water lane layers. How do you do that in a period of 1 year? Water, 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 water. Stop, everybody. Here comes a whole bunch of air dumping in about 1,000 feet of sand, which then gets compacted into hard rock sandstone. And then it doesn't dissolve away when there's a whole bunch more layers of water on top of it. That's kind of hard to explain geologically, folks. So anyway, those are the kinds of things we talk about. If you are really a creation and evolution nerd, you might want to come on our Grand Canyon trip. But another example of how creationists try to disprove an ancient Earth are the so-called man tracks, human and dinosaur footprints found together in Texas and elsewhere. Now let me just turn this the right side up for you, because you can't read it upside down, but it says, oops, hello, what happened to you here? Go back. Sorry. Dinosaur and human footprints found together in Texas. Well, that would certainly be very interesting from the standpoint of evolution, because the way, well, it's Texas, so lots of things happen in Texas, but even in Texas, you would not expect dinosaur and human footprints to occur together, because they certainly don't occur anywhere else on the planet. And in fact, all of the evidence we have shows that dinosaurs died out millions of years, tens of millions of years before the ancestors of humans came on the planet. So this is a curious discovery. That's one of the claims that they have. But then again, if special creation occurred, that means all creatures were created at the same time. So humans coexisted with dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. These illustrations, by the way, are all from creationist websites. Okay, these are their drawings, not mine. Okay. I explain this because sometimes when I describe creationist positions and I show illustrations from their websites, sometimes people get angry during the question period and say that I'm mocking the creationists. I'm not mocking them. I am showing you what they say. You can go to creationist websites and find these and, from my opinion, sillier examples. But I'm not stacking the deck. I'm telling you what they are presenting as what they consider scientifically supported. And, of course, if you just want to believe this for religious purposes, fine, But if you're going to call it science, then we have to talk. And that is the objection that the science community has to these claims that science supports the idea of special creation, human and dinosaur footprints together, a young Earth, and so forth. So all creatures were created at the same time, so humans and dinosaurs lived together. All creatures were on the ark. This is a drawing of the inside of the ark with two dinosaurs, two sauropods being fed by members of Noah's family. And all dinosaurs were originally vegetarian, which might have made feeding them easier. The creationists are kind of funny about vegetarianism and dinosaurs. Sometimes they say the carnosaurs and the other carnivorous dinosaurs became carnivorous after the fall. Other times they say it was after the flood. If you want to know more about why dinosaurs and humans didn't live together, why the Texas and other man tracks are not evidence, we have this little journal, Creation Evolution, that you can find on our website, ncse.com. And you can look at an analysis of the so-called evidence for humans and dinosaurs living together. Now, one thing that Darwin would have been extremely surprised by is the rise of Islamic creationism. The migration of large numbers of Muslims from the Middle East and elsewhere to Europe was unknown in Darwin's time. Today, however, there's an extensive anti-evolution literature that comes primarily from Turkey. Adnan Akhtar, writing as Harun Yahya, has published almost uncountable numbers of books and other materials. Clearly, Harun Yahya is a pen name for a large number of people who all write under that same name. There's no way that one human being can publish as much. Even people coming up for tenure can't publish as much as Harun Yahya publishes. These documents have been widely translated into Arabic and other languages, are very widespread in the Muslim world. In Great Britain, there is much opposition to evolution in the Muslim community, even at the university level. The Turkish anti-evolutionism, as exemplified by Harun Yahya, was inspired by American young Earth creationism. During the 1980s and 1990s, Institute for Creation Research spokespeople like Dwayne Gish and Henry Morris visited Turkey to promote their version of young Earth creationism. Akhtar took these materials, the anti-evolutionism from the young Earth creationist, ditched the young Earth part, which he wasn't interested in, ditched the Jesus part that he wasn't interested in, but kept the focus on design, kept the idea that evolution is terrible science, and that's what mostly Harun Yahya focuses upon. It is a false doctrine that leads to bad things, and so forth. Famously, Yahya has published the Atlas of Creation, volumes 1 to 3 so far, and there are 10 of them planned, which if you have ever seen volumes 1, 2, or 3, staggers the imagination. These things are the definition of a doorstop. They're about 2 inches thick, and they're these huge, very expensive, full-color, shiny pages. They're quite magnificent. How many of you science faculty were sent copies of this tome? I'm surprised none of you have seen this. Amazing. I thought, okay, just nobody in this room, yeah. They were sent to American scientists and European scientists all over, I don't know how many hundreds of these very expensive volumes were mailed out. And I guess Yahya just assumed that we would all take a look at this volume and say, oh, I've been wrong all these years. These are extraordinarily beautiful pictures. And Yahya doesn't seem to be terribly concerned about where he got them. Many of them are stolen from the National Geographic, by the way. Copyright laws appear to be a little lax in Turkey, shall we say. But each picture reflects the idea that fossil forms are essentially identical to living ones, therefore there's been no evolution, therefore evolution is a hoax, therefore special creation by God. This caddisfly is a particularly lovely insect, I think. Actually, this is a picture of a fishing lure that Yahya got from an advertisement on the internet. And the same carefulness is reflected in the rest of the book. It's a very well done fishing lure, let's face it. Islamic anti-evolutionism is more widely spread than just in Turkey, however. In this textbook from Saudi Arabia, there is this passage: nevertheless, in the West appeared what is called the theory of evolution, which was derived by the Englishman Charles Darwin, who denied Allah's creation of humanity, saying that all living things and humans are from a single origin. We do not need to pursue such a theory because we have in the Book of Allah the final say regarding the origin of life, that all living things are Allah's creation. This is from a 12th grade Saudi Arabian biology book. Notice the reference to in the West. As in Turkey, in many parts of the Arab world especially, sometimes anti-evolutionism gets wrapped around nationalism. In Turkey, it's very, very strong. One of the reasons for you to reject evolution if you are a good Turkish Muslim is because it's Western, and we all know West is evil, and they're hegemonic, and they're capital, and they're colonialistic and all the bad things. And so it's much more complicated to look at creationism or anti-evolutionism in the Muslim world. There's a lot of... Looking at creationism overseas is fascinating, and that's an interesting talk, but I'm not giving that one tonight. But in general, you have history and culture and nationality and politics wrapped up elsewhere, just like you have here, but it's just that the history and the politics are all different elsewhere. What would absolutely bowl Darwin over was the idea of Hindu creationism. The Krishna consciousness movement, promoted by the Bhaktivedanta Institute in the United States, promotes a form of anti-evolutionism. In the 1990s, a movie called Mysterious Origins of Man, narrated by Charlton Heston, was actually shown on network TV, much to the horror of the scientific community. And it purported to be a scientific treatment of the view that there are serious problems with evolution. Hindu anti-evolutionism focuses on the idea that the current cycle of reality is 350 million years. Well, all cycles are 350 million years, but all creatures were created at the same time 350 million years ago, so people and dinosaurs lived together. That part the young Earth creationists loved. They didn't like the part about the 350 million years. That didn't sit very well because they didn't want the Earth to be more than about 6,000 or 10,000 years, but nonetheless. But this is a completely different kind of creationism, but it still is an anti-evolutionary view. The book Forbidden Archaeology offers proof of this with a lot of out of context artifacts like a supposed human leather sandal. Of course, it's fossilized, right? It's very hard. It's very rock-like, which was found in the Devonian, which is the age of fishes. That was a while ago. There weren't any people, and no fish wear sandals. Okay, so that's not, this is probably something that is either mistaken for a sandal because superficially it looks like a sandal, or it's something that fell into a cave and got, stoned in, so to speak. There's a lot of different ways that inclusions can be added to strata. Many, if not most, of the items that are claimed to disprove evolution in forbidden archaeology have been discussed or explained, and the residual must merely remain curiosities. That's a funny-looking rock. It looks kind of like a sandal. But it's in the Devonian, so it's not a sandal. Okay. You don't do science by anomaly, and that is pretty much what these guys do, and that's pretty much what the creation science people do as well. Yet what Darwin would truly be excited about, if he could come back today, is the growth of real science that refutes these creationist ideas and supports his discoveries. As a geologist, he would be extremely excited about continental drift, which solves so many fossil biogeographic puzzles. It wasn't known during Darwin's day that the continents have changed their position. It would really make so much sense in explaining the distribution of plants and animals around the planet that so puzzled Darwin. And actually, biogeography is one of the major supporters of evolutionary theory. He would be delighted with Mendelian genetics, which provided the source for recurring variation without which natural selection didn't work. Fun historical fact. Darwin made two big points on the origin of species. One, that living things have common ancestors. Evolution happened. The second big point he made was that natural selection is the main engine of this change. Now, unlike today, the creationists all accept natural selection. You kind of can't turn it down. That's what's causing pesticide resistant in insects on the fields of the farmers in Illinois. It's what's causing antibiotic resistance in the kinds of microorganisms that cause diseases. So everybody says, yeah, natural selection happens. We accept that. Creationists as well as everybody else. What the creationists don't accept is the idea of common ancestry. In Darwin's day, it was just the opposite. The idea of common ancestry was accepted very, very quickly, within a decade in the scientific community, within a couple decades in the religion community. But the idea of natural selection was a tougher sell because nobody knew anything about genetics. With natural selection, you all kind of know a little bit about natural selection because you all had high school biology, so I'm going to assume a basic understanding here. And you think, high school biology, I did take it. What did I learn about natural selection? You've got a population, some variants do better in a particular environment, so they leave more copies of their gene, they live longer, survive longer, reproduce more. That's basically natural selection, if the reason why they survive is because they have some inherited ability to cope with their environmental circumstances, basically. Well, what that means is every generation the environment selects on a population, reducing the variation, right? Logically speaking. Where does the variation come from? And Darwin didn't know. Neither did anybody else, except this guy Gregor Mendel, who was out putzing around with peas in a monastery in Eastern Europe. But nobody paid any attention to him. So, and Darwin, kind of tried to come up with blending inheritance and, gemmules that were in the body of the father and the body of the mother, and they would come together. It didn't work. It's just, he didn't know. And so it took a long time for natural selection to be accepted as a really powerful mechanism helping to drive evolutionary changes. So Darwin would have been so extraordinarily delighted to hear about Mendelian genetics. That's his missing variation for explaining how natural selection works. And can you imagine how excited he would have been with molecular genetics, to really understand the nuts and bolts of how the genetic material gets not just passed on through generations, but how it changes as a result of mutational pressures and other kinds of genetic factors. So, you know, he would have loved to have shaken the hands of Watson and Crick, and I assure you, Watson and Crick would have loved to have shaken his hand, believe me. From the beginnings of the understanding of development, of developmental biology, embryology, scientists have noticed that some embryos are more similar to one another than to others. Embryos of mammals on the right-hand side of that slide are more similar to one another than they are to embryos of birds. Eventually, it came to be understood that this is explained by common ancestry. The more recently two forms shared a common ancestor, the more similar they would be in anatomy. And this is also true in embryology. Creationists, by the way, totally screw this up, but I don't have time to talk about it. Imagine how Darwin would have been entranced by the discoveries of a new field called Evo-Devo, which is evolution and development. There actually is the Journal of Evo-Devo. How embryological development, developmental biology affects evolution and vice versa. The finding of early acting genes that are virtually identical in fruit flies and mice in humans. They're identical in the sense that they say, this is the front end of the animal, this is the back end of the animal, this is the top of the animal, this is the bottom of the animal, this is right, this is left. Make an appendage. Oh, it's an insect, so make it a wing. Make an appendage. Oh, it's a vertebrate, make it a leg. But the genes are very, very similar. They're very much conserved. They have descended with modification from common ancestors. And by studying these early acting genes and other genes, we've been able to, largely through biochemical and molecular techniques, understand so much more about evolution than Darwin would have dreamed of. He would have been so excited to have been able to learn this information. Now, the fossil record has improved in so many ways from what Darwin understood in his day, in the late 1800s. Darwin had speculated on the evolution of whales in Origin of Species. Now, if you look at whales anatomically, they may be shaped like fish, but they're mammals. Okay. They're warm-blooded. They have hair, not a lot, but they do have hair. They've got all these other anatomical features that make them related to mammals, land mammals at that. So how did you end up with this creature that looks like a land mammal and it's a fully aquatic animal? You know, whales that get beached die. They can breathe air, but they no longer can survive on land because they're too heavy. They don't have legs anymore to support their bodies, and they crush their lungs is what happens. So how did whales end up from land animals to marine animals? Well, there wasn't a fossil record of whales in Darwin's day. Now we have this wonderful little fossil called Indohyus, which would show the sort of, in Darwin's term, small modifications toward a marine mammal, but it clearly is a land animal. But something like Indohyus gave rise through a sequence of intermediate forms to modern-day whales. And nowadays, especially from the last 20 years of paleontological work, we have so many fossils of whales. We have whales with legs. We have whales with feet. We have whales with just little stubs. We have whales with nostrils on the end of their snouts, and we have whales with nostrils part way up, and we have whales with nostrils at the top of their head like modern-day whales. We've got whales that have inner ears, which are very much like those of land animals, except for some little tweaks. And we have whales with inner ears that look very much like those of amphibious animals that spend part of the time in the water and on the land. We have this wonderful sequence of intermediate characteristics from the fossil record that give us a very clear idea of how whales evolved. Now that doesn't mean that we have the great daddy whale. Okay, we do have probably the great 40-umpty-ninth cousin of modern-day whales, but that cousin has that kind of nostril position, that kind of central ear configuration that tells us that something very much like that was the great granddaddy whale. Okay, I mention this because creationists are very confused about what we consider transitional features and what they consider transitional fossils. They're looking for great-granddaddy. We don't have great-granddaddy. We don't expect to find a complete lineage of fossils leading to land animals and modern-day whales. But what we do want to find and what we are seeking are those features, those characteristics of what makes a whale a whale. The loss of limbs, the middle ear, the nostrils, dental characteristics. We're looking for those characteristics that would have to change from the configuration of those features in a land animal to that of a fully marine animal. And we find this whole series of wonderful intermediate characteristics. You couldn't ask for a better series of transitions. But they aren't, we don't have great-great-granddaddy whale. We have all the cousins and all the great-aunts and uncles and people like that, or creatures like that. So Darwin would just be extravagantly pleased with the fossil record. And just imagine how delighted he would be with our understanding of human evolution. In Darwin's day, what was there? There was the Neanderthal skull cap. And I think there was there might have been part of one of the long bones. I should remember. I'm a physical anthropologist. Why can't I remember this? There wasn't a heck of a lot in terms of human fossils. Now, somewhat more. This is not the full total of the human fossil record, trust me. Okay, this is just a smattering of some of the more complete skulls. And I'm not showing any of the postcranial, of the body bones. But, just take a look at this. Creationists are always saying there's either apes or there are humans. There's no transitional fossils. Let's just take a moment here and look at this drawing. Starting up there with one of the very early Australopithecines, starting down there at the very lower right-hand corner with the European Cro-Magnon, or Upper Paleolithic modern humans, essentially the same as you and I. A little bit better muscular development because we sit around too much, but basically same size, same teeth, same size, brain size and all that. Where would you draw the line between just ape and fully human? Pretty hard to draw the line, isn't it? Pretty good, and this is just skulls, okay? This is just sort of a snapshot of brain size. Darwin would have been very happy indeed. Biogeography, which was so important to Darwin in the development of his ideas, the distribution of plants and animals, this has continued to be a vigorous area of research, even coming to the public in a number of very good popular books, which I would recommend any of these. They're really quite wonderful. I always say when, periodically in a question and answer session, or if I'm wandering around someplace, a creationist might ask me, what's the best evidence for evolution? Biogeography. And if you don't know what biogeography is, look it up. It's probably on Wikipedia, what can you say? And yet, just these well-supported principles and observations, fossils, molecular homologies, embryology, and biogeography, are questioned in the most recent intelligent design effort to bring confusion to schools, Explore Evolution. So what would Darwin say to these creationists? Well, I suspect he would probably give them his sternest gaze and ask, haven't you been paying attention during the last 153 years? So, if you want to know more about these topics, and particularly about the pressures that teachers feel when they try to teach good science, evolution, and unfortunately, more recently, global warming, NCSE's website, ncsc.com. If you'd like to sign up for a free electronic newsletter, you can follow that link there. And in this link, students looking for term paper topics, this is where you can find a whole lot of information really quickly. And it's all very good. Don't copy it, just paraphrase it, okay? And we are a membership organization, so I do encourage you to join. My staff at NCSE is Glenn Branch, my deputy director. Robert Lunn is communications director. Peter Hess is our religious community outreach director. Josh Rosenau, Steve Newton, and Eric Mickel are my Flare-ups wranglers, these are the guys that handle most of the cases where, for example, the bill in Missouri, that's on Josh's list. If you want to know about the Missouri bill, call Josh. And they advise people at the grassroots on how to deal with these issues. And our two brand new flare-ups wranglers, Mark McCaffrey, our new climate change people, Mark McCaffrey. Wait a second, where did Minda go? I lost Minda's pictures. Apologies for that. We also are on Facebook and on YouTube, so please do check out our Facebook and YouTube pages. We have lots of information on both of those sources, and you can sign up to, you can like NCSE's Facebook page and get our updates. And if you want to friend me, please do it at eugenie.scott, because there's a bunch of other Eugenie Scott pages out there, but they're not really me. So if you want, for whatever reason you want to get my updates, this is where you go, is eugenie.scott. But I've enjoyed very much my visit to SIU, and I really thank the committee for being kind enough to invite me to come. And I thank you for being such a very attentive audience, and thank you for your attention.